This was like a very prototype-driven project.
What was your first iteration like?
So I was able to kind of mop this up. This didn't feel like a hard task for me. I was like, one, I already knew that it was going to be X, Y axes. Two, I wanted more structure in the overall grids being like clear boxes. And then I wanted to add like a couple really fun shadows. I don't know if you know that SpongeBob meme where he's like writing something really hard and all he did was like sketch out this one T. So we were thinking, oh, this could be a fun way to show it.
Howdy and welcome to Deep Dive. This is your host, Jay. Today we have Natasha from Figma. Natasha, this is going to be my favorite project that we cover. AI design project for Figma Slides. Oh, my bad. Slides AI.
Yeah, you'll probably catch me saying slides for most of this, so apologies ahead of time. But it is what it is. Even as you can see here, my thumbnail is Slides AI.
What was this project about?
At this point, I was still helping shape FigJam AI and all of the suite of tools that we had there. We ended up getting some research insight back from the Figma Slides team that one of the most expected AI features that they would like to see in a slide tool is anything to do with text manipulation, right? Anything that helps them tell their story better. Instead of thinking about, okay, what is the whole portfolio of AI tools in Figma Slides? What's the AI system? All of that. We really just wanted to think about if text manipulation is going to be the most important thing right now, let's think about how we might do that and do that really well and do it in a way that's maybe a little bit more novel and a little bit more fun. Because I think when you look at the sort of landscape of most text manipulation tools now, it's very much anchored on either complete prompting, taking the full capability of an LLM by just knowing how to prompt and manipulate text that way, or it's, I don't know, make this more professional, clear, casual stuff. And they're just individual buttons, right? And I think we wanted to think about what is an evolution of that has and persists some novelty, but also gives you a lot more control of what specific tones you'd like to strike for storytelling as like a very focused goal. And I think at this point, we're also just very inspired by a lot of the work like the browser company's doing and like how they're thinking about the overall color selectors and arc and all that stuff. So we're trying to think about even naturally an interaction that feels a little bit more tactile and playable and fidgetable. And Jordan and Marco put together like a really great sort of principles on how to design for AI a long time ago. And one of the qualities is like fidgetable. Make it something that you can fidget with and explore an option space quickly, make mistakes, but fidgetable. So we were trying to think about what that looks like for Slides specifically.
What was the final version that got shipped that you designed?
So the final version, probably not going to be as wow, because it's not really, maybe there's one in situ mock here, but it is the tone dial, which is accessible via the properties panel. If you have any text nodes selected, you can just invoke this AI tool here and you see a dial UI where the dial essentially is a matrix of tones, really intersected by one axis of professional and casual and another one of concise and expanded. And then to make it even easier for people to use, we anchor it on a specific set of presets that felt really core to presentations. Executive is any tone that would need you to write an executive summary or something that's like concise, but for CEOs to read or for your leads to read. So it needs to be professional. Basic is for literally basic writing. I just want it to be short and I want it to be casual. Technical is when you have domain expertise, right? If you're a researcher, you want something to have like comprehension, like a strong domain expertise, but also make it sound professional. So like basic is somewhere in this quadrant here. And then educational is explain it to me like I'm like 9, right? Where you need it to be like, you don't want to lose the context. You want it to be expanded. You want it to be something that's of kind of sustenance, but you want it to be approachable for people. So we were, okay, these core tones feel so inherent to presentations. Let's think about a way to use them as presets.
Did you create a prototype to show the fidgetability of this?
Yes, this was like a very prototype-driven project.
So this, what you have here, Natasha, is the final version that got shipped. But what was your first iteration like, your first attempt at making it more fidgetable?
Yeah, it's very funny because I think in my head, I could already see what the interface was going to look like. So in terms of fidgetable, it really comes down to just being able to select some level of dial and move it around a matrix, that felt clear in my head. The unclear portion was how the hell were we going to make a matrix of tones? That was probably the biggest open question. So one of my first iterations was this crit I facilitated. Yeah, so here's a very long crit where here were a bunch of my first iterations where I think I cared. Maybe like I wasn't like the UI wasn't as clean. I was still like trying to better understand what the overall grid should be. Should be a dot grid? Should just be like an actual square grid? Should it just be a clean grid? Literally nothing. Well, what approach were we taking? And even then, like, how did we want to show presets? At this point, we were running out of the assumption that like the entry point for this will be through actions within slides. So we were trying to think of a more horizontal orientation for that, which is hard to design for when you're trying to think of a really like a dial, right? We were really just trying to play around overall with different versions of what this could look like. And I think at this crit, I added all of this as a part of it. Jam on this UI surface, add riffs or inspo. And I just got people to jump in there and leave some ideas. Here was like this is probably one of the very first iterations I made where I think it was like a combination of dots and guiding markers, being really clear which each corners mean. This is if you were to ask me, like one of the biggest changes we made here, I have a very clear answer for that. That was like the benefit of taking work to crit. One of my first crits was literally like, again, tone dials 101. Why a tone dial? And also what are the tones we're anchoring on and why? So this was my first sort of like breakdown of the overall anatomy. And my initial exploration was like, oh, formal could be here, casual could be here, detailed could be here, and short could be here. And the biggest pieces of feedback I got was like, hey, this looks all great, but it feels weird that tones are the vertexes. Shouldn't they be something more like this instead? Because right now it's like this. So they're like, maybe just rotate it like 90 degrees and it would make more sense. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Let's do that. So we did that. Because then in this way, instead of having these tones be like the corners, we could just have the intersecting tones then be the quadrants. And that feels like much clearer for people. That was one of the most, oh yeah, duh. Like, why did we do that? But again, I think in much of my early explorations, it was like, yeah, I think the UI will be fine. We can figure this out as we go. My main concern is how are we going to make this work? And not only make this work, but make this work and have it pass like a quality bar, a round of evals or whatever. We needed to think about that. And a lot of this wasn't even designs. This was just like some thoughts. I remember adding like general thoughts of approaches. And I think this is some of the more or less sexy parts of the design process when what you're trying to visualize and get feedback on isn't necessarily mocks or prototypes. It's thinking, like how you're thinking about something and like approaches for, this is one of the open questions, right? Like how aggressive should we enforce a mapping on like an infinite dial where you can choose so many coordinates of potential tones. So do you want to really be very aggressive? Do you want it to be like completely free form? So there was like so many conversations here around that. But ultimately what I was trying to like really visualize is like, what is the anatomy of this plane? That seems very simple when people use it now on prod, but like below that, there's like a whole layer of blueprints that we need to think through essentially. But yeah, here is definitely one of my first explorations that I did not like. It was truly just to see what we could do on the UI front.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been playing around with the colors of it. Yeah, I see the red color, like you're playing with the shades of it. There's like tooltips coming up. Like you're educating the user as well, like when they hover over that, okay, what that quadrant means. Interesting.
Yeah, this was at a point where we knew that intersecting tones could be useful, but didn't know whether they needed to be explicit presets in the UI. Could it just be something someone comes across as they're dragging things? But even then we get into the whole slew of edge cases of like how inconsistent that could be. There's a lot of value in this that I feel like we're burying, a lot of that stuff. So we made a couple of trade-offs there.
Where did you go from this iteration? After this crit, what was the next set of exploration or iteration that you did?
Yeah, one thing I'll also call out here is people were starting to mock my fellow designers. I think this is always so funny when you work with people who are just like, we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Tag yourself. Oh my
We can make a dial like an actual icebreaker. I'm
God. So
definitely
fun.
here. From at that point, I already had an idea of how the dial would look like in my brain. So I was able to kind of mock this up. This didn't feel like a hard task for me. I was like, one, I already knew that it was going to be X, Y axes. Two, I wanted more structure in the overall grids being like clear boxes. And then I wanted to add like a couple really fun shadows. So I can show you maybe like another way I spec this out, but there's some really cool inner shadows in some of these grids, and also added like a couple layered shadows for the drop shadow. So this part eventually ended up being very quickly, like I iterated on that very quickly. I think what was challenging was, okay, what do we do about presets? And how do we want to fit that into this overall experience? So I remember going through a couple rounds of explorations here where I think my first idea for presets was, oh, maybe here. I ended up jamming with Kian, who is the core designer on the slides team. We're thinking about where could we go with presets. We were thinking this sort of thumbnail-esque format where maybe there's like a visual tie to a tone. We were trying to play, this is something that I mocked, where maybe shorter is visualized this way, longer is visualized that way, casual is visualized by this handwriting font, and formal is by like a, what's it called? Like I don't know if you know that SpongeBob meme where he's like writing something really hard and all he did was like sketch out this one T. So we were thinking, oh, this could be a fun way to show it. Unfortunately, when you look at this in context of, I don't know if I have a mock of it here. Yeah, I don't think, oh, here. If you look at this in the context of the properties panel, they can be easily misconstrued as textiles, like actual textile. Maybe clicking formal will change the font of my node to a curly T, like a Gothic, English Gothic T, right? So we were like, okay, that's going to be a little bit confusing. Maybe we shouldn't do that. We even had a point where we believed in presets so much, but that we didn't even want to show the dial immediately. We were like, maybe the presets could just be embedded directly in the properties panel. And if you did want more control, you could click into more actions and then that would invoke the dial that you can play around with. So we were like, oh, maybe we could do it this way. Unfortunately, I think having socialized this around, everyone was like, no, we want the dial to be like the main way people use, and then presets as like and then we also have this. So this one was like a presets first, FYI, we have a dial. We ended up going with a dial first, FYI, we have a preset. So yeah, multiple explorations there. Trying to think of something else here. Yeah, this was just like, again, more explorations around what this could look like. And then also maybe it's just like a long list. This feels just like a little bit too lengthy. This one feels unclear. This kind of is, you only see the preset reveal itself if you drag it to a very predefined corner. If you drag the dial somewhere here, this wouldn't show. But if you drag it like to casual and shorter, then we would show right friendly. Casual and short makes things friendlier. So a lot of ideas here, obviously.
Why did they not make it like in that specific one? Why did this idea not make it to the final production?
It really ultimately came down to people still wanting a very repeatable and reliable way to access presets. So we wanted presets to be something that was anchored by the dial. So something like this was immediately a like no-go, because this really leaned on someone's exploration to understand where you could go. We wanted presets to be one visual cue to get you to know what this is supposed to do. Because I think when a new user sees something like this, they can be overwhelmed. They're like, what is this? I've never seen this before. Am I supposed to drag it? What am I supposed to be doing? How do I get it right? And how do I get it right every single time I use it? So we needed something that was maybe a little bit less novel, right? A little bit familiar. Ended up leading it down to these two options. And then I think ultimately this just felt a little bit too confusing since text didn't have very clear visual metaphors to it. We could try, this feels fine, but didn't feel the best. So we ended up going, maybe it's just easier to have something that's simple and repeatable and let the dial speak for itself, right? So this was like one of our next versions of it that I ended up bringing to crit too. This was like a very casual crit. Eventually we thought that these items specifically didn't feel like it fit in this overall menu, and we wanted it to be really honestly just focused on the tone dial. So we cut those things out, moved it to the actions menu, and really simplified presets, which eventually landed us at this final state. So it's meant truly just to nudge you to explore the different intersecting tones in this sort of infinite dial. And if you needed a way to reliably access specific coordinates, essentially, you can access them down here. So that kind of was what led to this.
Yeah, the pencil icon that you have with the AI magic sprinkle on it, was it to indicate that any of these presets is using AI? What was the reasoning for using that pencil with that sparkly, like that specific icon?
Is a very good question. So I'm glad you asked, because for our initial launch, this actually wasn't in the prod experience. The reason being is that this is actually an entry point to use our rewrite this feature, which is in actions. So for example, you can always, let's say if these tones feel too limiting for you, what we wanted to help you do is you can always click this and technically interact with the full capability of an LLM as much as you want. So you can be like, oh, rewrite as a rhyme, rewrite as a song, rewrite in French, rewrite to be more casual and a little bit funny. Like, we had those capabilities technically, but I think one piece of feedback that we received is like, oh, this is great and cool, and we can use it if these are the actual accesses that we want to use, but it's limiting how you can actually interface with a full LLM. We wanted to make it clear that, yeah, we believe that, we agree with that, and you should be able to. This actually ended up launching yesterday or 2 days ago, I believe, in our like Slides 10 days with 10 drops drop that we did. So we've been like slowly releasing really great quality of life improvements in Figma Slides through the last 10 days. I think we're like at day 9 today, but on day 8, it was essentially one, the fact that like the tone dial now supports more languages. So if you're using it in Japanese, you're using it in Indonesian, you're using it in Spanish, it can help adjust tones in those languages pretty effectively. And 2, we also added a very easy quick entry point for you to essentially prompt yourself if you want to. The final copy of this is different. I don't have the file here because it's like in a different Figma file, but it's like adjust tone, and the copy here says pick a preset or rewrite, and this is essentially rewriting. And that leads you to this.
Makes sense. And then I also seen that the specific tone dial picker, you have put a lot of time and effort in the shadows, the drop shadows. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was your like thinking behind that, using the shadows treatment?
And just for my own design, what's it called? I don't know. I think sometimes when you're working as a designer, you're trying to think about, oh, where can I really push it a little bit more to make it maybe a little bit more tactile or to make it a little bit more 3D or whatever. So I think I had an exploration of this dial before where it was literally just like one frame, 2 lines, and 2 other lines, and like each text tone and like the dial in the middle. But I'm like, oh, there's maybe opportunity here to give it some more depth, even if it's maybe not recognizable by most, right? But I think personally for me, when our engineers implemented it, we're like, oh, we see it feels like it's really coming more to life. So I just remember this is an overly simplified version of what some of these layers are. And I ended up having to work with our engineers, Catherine and Jerry, on just like really specifying what it's meant to look as. Ended up going through multiple rounds of riffing, but we eventually ended up landing on something like this. And I think what's even nicer is, let me see if I can find it. Oh, like maybe here. Yeah, it looks really good in dark mode.
Yeah.
This was like a design QA riff that I did where I think initially, for example, this was the first dark mode version. And I think like the shadows were trailing, but the actual this quadrant specifically didn't feel like it was the right token color. So I'm like, maybe we can make it a little bit lighter so there's more contrast between the actual menu and the dial itself, but let's keep the shadows the way it is because it looks good in dark mode. I think you can really see like the highlights here a little bit more. But yeah, that's overall what the tone dial was.
Without the shadows, it feels like just a generic tic-tac-toe. That's what it reminds me of. But I think you adding the shadow, like you said, it brings it to life. It adds a bit of fun and personality to it, I feel. That's how I'm seeing it as a user.
Yeah, I'm glad. I think this is what's great about working with engineers who are also just like, has pretty strong design acumen. We were like doing it for us. Like, even if nobody notices it, we like it. We're like, it looks great. But if you know, you know.
Hey folks, this is Jay. It means the world to me that you watch this video. Let me know in the comments what topics you want me to cover in the future, and I will see you in the next deep dive.